Hey guys, welcome. Hello, hello. Really good to be back. It's been a while since we've last done a live stream. Really sorry about that. We've been pretty busy over here. But yeah, we're really happy to be back with you, and we'll be coming back to the usual time frame of one live stream, one presentation every 2 weeks. Yeah, and I saw on the comments already, you guys noticed our new logo. I hope you like it. Let us know your feedback about that. What do you think about it? It's really important to us. But as you can see, we haven't had the time yet to update our trailer. But that will be done shortly, so that there's no mismatch in between that. So let's get started straight away. We've got a presentation for you guys about benchmarking, ideation, and how to come up with new gameplay ideas for your prototypes. So, benchmarking to level up. How do I do this? 1 second. Youssef? Comment je contrôle le truc? Sorry guys, it's a quick technical issue. Comment je contrôle la presse? Man, elle est où? Ah, okay. Here we go. Non, même pas, mec. Okay, here we go, guys. Sorry about that. So, presentation is about benchmarking and how to prepare yourselves to ideate in the best way possible. So we did this presentation a while back in December. So we thought it was important to revamp it in order to make sure, well, first of all, to make sure that people really understand what we mean by that. And also we updated it since then. Youssef?
Clique sur la presse. Clique sur l'écran et la presse.
Ah.
C'est bon?
Yeah, there's a slight delay, guys. Sorry about that. Okay, anyway, so first of all, why do we benchmark? The first reason that we really encourage you guys to benchmark. Oh, guys, really sorry. We seem to have really bad internet these days. It's jumping out from section to section. Obviously, I want to talk about why we benchmark, not how to benchmark. Right. Okay, I guess I'll just try to figure out I'll just give the presentation without the slides. We'll get back to that afterwards. So the reason we really recommend you guys to benchmark is, well, for 3 reasons. First of all is to try to see what's out there, what's going on the market, what are the best practices, and compare your games to what's being done out there by the competition. And the second reason is, well, to find new ideas. It's often very difficult if you're on your own and you're not looking at the market, you're not looking at what's done out there, to get new ideas out of thin air. So the point of looking at the market or looking elsewhere when you benchmark is not to straight out copy what's being done, but rather to be influenced and to have creative triggers, to have new ideas come to you by looking at new things. And a third point for benchmarking is, or essentially, to have a good time, and it's a good way to, in a way, stop your day-to-day routine and get your head out of Unity or whatever other engine you're using, building your prototypes, and have a bit of a breath of fresh air. So moving on to then, how do we benchmark? Well, the first way to benchmark, I know it's not on the slide. Let's jump to slide again. So the first way a reason to benchmark is to understand the reasons of success of these other games. So it's really important to ask yourself, why is a specific gameplay fun? That's really the first question you have to ask yourselves. Why is something fun? Why would someone play this game, do this gameplay loop 1,000 times in a row. Another question you have to ask yourself when you're benchmarking is, why is a specific gameplay clear? Are the rules of the game, the objectives of the game, are they clearly communicated to the users? And it's really important to understand that when you're building your prototypes. Another question to ask yourselves is this gameplay innovative? Is this a new idea? Is this a new mechanic? Something that the market hasn't seen or has seen for the very first time, or at least hasn't seen in a long time. So those are the first series of questions that are really, really essential to ask yourselves whilst you're doing your benchmarking. A second step that we recommend to take is to try and understand the reasons for a lack of success in certain games that you see whilst you're benchmarking. So in a way, it's trying to think very, very critically about the games that you see on the market. So for example, you should be able to ask yourself, is this gameplay snackable? Is it something that I can play say in around 30 seconds? Is the gameplay loop short enough? You should also ask yourself, is this gameplay actually YouTubeable? So would a random person in the street, if they were to see a video of the gameplay, of the pure gameplay, would they be able to understand, well, one, the objectives of the game, how to win the game, how to lose the game, without actually playing the game, but just by seeing it? It's really important to be critical about that and be able to identify which games are YouTubeable and which others aren't. Another question that's really important to ask yourselves is this game gameplay first? So does it really put the emphasis on the gameplay, or does it maybe confuse the users by showing elements that are not related to the gameplay? So maybe too much visual elements, or elements that are confusing or superficial, or at least that do not relate to the gameplay. That's, again, important to be critical about that. A second series of questions you guys can ask yourselves is this game, when I see it, is this system 1? Or is this system 2? Again, just a quick recap on that. Is this game, does it require a lot of mental gymnastics, a lot of reflection by the user in order to understand what's going on? Or is it something super, super obvious, really dead obvious to people, and it allows them to be in a state of flow whilst playing the game? Another question is forgiving. Is the game forgiving? As in, is it too difficult to play? Is it frustrating to the player? Does the player maybe think that the game system is imbalanced and therefore unfair, and that they shouldn't have lost? That's something very, very important when you build your game, and when you have to develop an eye to be critical about that feature. And the final feature, or final question you guys rather should be asking yourselves is this game that I'm benchmarking, does it actually have depth? So what we mean by depth is, does it give the users the option to play in different ways? So a typical example of a game that has, well, no depth is, for example, Flappy Bird. Back in the day when it came out, it was a huge game, and however, it did not have any depth, because in a way it was very, very binary. You either won or you either lost, and there was nothing in between. There was no halfway solution. You had to win or you had to lose. In games that have depth, there is much more spectrum, there is much more options given to the player on how to play and on how to win. A third reason to benchmark and how to benchmark is to compare yourself, to compare the prototype or the idea that you have with what you see out there. So comparing essentially your project, your prototype, to other games out there. Is your game clean versus beautiful? And we'd rather recommend having something cleaner than necessarily beautiful. Is the balance of a game difficulty, is it appropriate? Is it maybe too hard? Is it maybe too easy? It all depends on the gameplay that you guys go for. And then it's also important to challenge the controls that you have decided to go for in your game. For example, if you have an aim game, is a tap and aim control like in knockballs, is that the most appropriate control for your game? Or is maybe a drag and name control more appropriate? So those are questions that are important to ask yourselves when comparing your game to other games out there. And so by sharpening your sensibility and comparing yourself to other games, what the objective is then to allow you guys to focus on your innovation. So by looking at what's being done on the market, looking at other games out there in the top charts, you should be able to, when you critically think about those other games and compare those games to your projects, the next step is then to push on your next innovation, find your new feature, and the other small nice-to-have features that can really make the difference for your gameplay because you've benchmarked your game so well. And then another point that I think is important also to cover is where to benchmark. Where do you actually go to benchmark your ideas? A first place where you guys can benchmark is obviously the top charts. Looking at the top charts out there, seeing what's being done, seeing other games that are out there. One point of caution about looking at the top charts is it's not because a game is in the top charts, say in the top 20 top charts, that it's necessarily a top performing game or that it has good retention. If a game is in, say, the top 20 but only stays there for a week and then 2 days afterwards it falls down to rank 568, that means that the game essentially shot up really quickly into the top charts but then came crashing down immediately afterwards. That's a telltale sign that a game was artificially pushed by the developer or the publisher, and that also means that the game is not necessarily a good example of what's a good mechanic or a good control or a good idea in essence. So be careful at what you're looking at. Make sure that the games you're actually comparing your ideas to stay in the top charts for a long time, if you're looking for ideas that are good at least. Another place where you guys can benchmark your ideas is video games in general. So looking beyond mobile gaming, looking at PS4, PC games, Game Boy Advance, Xbox, Nintendo. There's so much to be found out there or even rediscovered. That can be a really useful source of inspiration and to compare your ideas to those classic games. And also one point to note is that back in the day of, say, the NES platform, the tech was very, very limited. So the developers back in the day really had to make do with what they had. And what that means is that most of the time they had to focus on the pure core gameplay. And that's essentially what today we're trying to do again in hyper-casual. So that's why we think it's a really strong source of inspiration for your ideas. And looking at all the gameplays has, well, potentially allowed us to, well, innovate on new ideas. This is a level from Mario 64, and that's potentially where the idea from Bumper.io could have come from. Same for example, looking at Beyblades, the actual toys, Beyblades, for another version of Bumper.io, or the classic Kepler games for an inspiration for Stack. Other than just games, we also really recommend to look beyond the video game industry. So look at articles online for user experience, websites for art and design, or even movies to find inspiration. The point of benchmarking, and this is a wide approach to benchmarking, granted, but the point of this approach to benchmarking is to trigger your creativity. So for example, watching an old classic 1960s movie can trigger ideas for another type of gameplay. The idea is to allow your brain to make connections that you wouldn't automatically make if you weren't benchmarking. So one final point is, now that we've spoken about benchmarking, is how not to benchmark, how that shouldn't be done. So I covered earlier the fact that you should benchmark, a good place to benchmark is the top charts. However, a real difficulty when you look at the top charts is, well, you often be tempted to, you'll see what's out there, and you'll often be tempted to try and emulate what's out there, or at least make a different variation of what you see out there. So for example, in the last month and a half, people have seen Color Bump 3D perform really well, and they're correct. It has been performing really, really well. However, what they've done is that they've taken Color Bump 3D as the basis for building their idea. And what they've done is simply tweak very, very slightly Color Bump 3D. But that doesn't work because the game is already out there, and if they would present their version of the game versus Color Bump 3D to a person in the street, the person in the street would legitimately think, well, this is essentially the same game, or it's another mode of that same game, or it's even just another level of Color Bump 3D. And guys, that will crash at testing. We've had terrible CPI in that regard, and it's really something you should avoid. So when you look at the top charts, really be careful to understand what's going on in the market, but do not be influenced by what's already out there. Don't try to emulate what's already out there. It'll simply be a waste of time for you because you'll be heavily punished on CPI and retention. And that's simply a waste of time for you, a waste of your resources. The point of looking at the top charts is to get ideas for other gameplays. Another way how not to benchmark is looking at satisfying GIFs and staying too close to those. So I know the animations aren't working on screen right now, but on the left we have a typical satisfying GIF that you can find on Pinterest, on Instagram, on Imager. And on the right, you essentially see a prototype that was built by the excellent team at Unigames. By the way, big shout out to Max and all the team. But the trouble that these guys have had is, well, they've seen this GIF on the left. They thought it was super, super satisfying, and they wanted to do something similar. But the problem here is that they've ended up with a product that's essentially a visual GIF. And there's nothing more to it. The gameplay is very, very superficial, and there's no depth to it. And that's also a problem we see more and more of people trying to emulate GIFs. Sure, it looks great visually, but it's not really a game, is it? So that's why we recommend looking at GIFs to trigger other ideas for gameplays, for prototypes, but don't try to recreate GIFs without actually having a proper gameplay to sustain them. So thanks, guys. That's it for the presentation. I hope it was helpful. If you have any questions about the presentation, let us know in the chat, and we're now going to move on to the Q&A section. And again, sorry for the delay or the technical problems. As you can tell, we're quite rusty on the live stream, but
hey guys,
it should be fixed by next time. So I'm joined by Thomas right now.
Hey guys, great to see you again. So I think the volume is a tiny bit louder now, so please let us know if it's still a bit down, and we'll find a fix.
Cool.
Thanks, Corentin, for the presentation as well.
Yeah.